Good day with your major newscast. I'm Jessica Daw. First with the highlights. The People's National Congress executive member Aubrey Norton has accused Government Minister Charles Ramson of attempting to mislead Black Guyanese about who are good role models. Almost 90% of Guyanese do not believe that votes at general and regional elections are counted accurately. In the region, Trinidad and Tobago gets new Coast Guard vessels to go after crimes at sea. And Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown has told Assot Michael to stop being an obstructionist and run as an independent. The details of these stories and more in just a moment.
Advertise with us on News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM for best coverage on programs on motivation, beauty and health, parenting and relationships, knowing your rights, and a variety of enlightening content, and get value for your money. Call our helpful staff today on 223-1056 or 223-1041 today.
Now for the news in detail. People's National Congress Reform PNCR executive member Aubrey Norton has accused Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport Charles Ramson of pointing Afro-Guyanese to wrong role models. Mr. Ramson has come in for sharp criticism over the weekend for saying that Black Guyanese do not have proper role models.
I think that in the Black community, young Black kids also need lots of examples of success because they have to be able to see that there's a pathway in order for them to build that successful life. And it bothers me a lot when I hear people who just came out of government, who spent $1.4 trillion in this country and failed the Black community, and still are walking around the place saying things as though they were capable of taking the Black community, giving the leadership that is needed to help to create wealth in the country and amongst the Black community.
But Mr. Norton has since lashed back at Mr. Ramson, saying that he should stay out of the PNCR's business and detest from recommending the wrong role models.
Listen carefully to what he's calling a role model. People with plenty money who corrupt. Tell him keep that model. We don't want it. We want a model in which our people work, they are decent and law-abiding. We do not want your type of role models. So I think you should stay in your corner and leave the People's National Congress reform alone.
And opposition leader Joseph Harmon is condemning Mr. Ramson's utterances as a lecture that was laced with racial undertones, bias, and prejudicial undertones. Arguing that the governing People's Progressive Party is racist, Mr. Harmon wants Guyanese to press for his removal.
I will not be asking that Ramson or HJ apologize to the African Guyanese community. Rather, I am calling on the African Guyanese community and all who are appalled by Ramson's sentiments to unite and push back against those who seek to define the African Guyanese reality within a nanoscopic and inglorious context. I call for us to take action, file petitions, seek Ramson's resignation or removal from office. Maybe they will ignore it, but let us show our disapproval.
Opposition leader Joseph Harmon. At least 87% of Guyanese do not believe that votes in general and regional elections are never counted correctly and fairly. This is one of several findings in the Latin American Public Opinion LAPOP poll conducted this year. Titled Pulse of Democracy, the report states that there is wide variation across countries of the Americas in terms of beliefs about election integrity. While 75% of Uruguayans believe that votes are always counted correctly, only 18% in Colombia, Guyana, and Jamaica agree. The figures show that 17% believe that votes are always counted correctly, and 65% say sometimes this is done. The Americas Barometer, regarded as the only scientifically rigorous comparative survey that covers 34 nations, is made possible with support from the U.S. Agency for International Development (USAID) and Vanderbilt University. Overall, the figures show that there is a mere 39% trust in elections. The report states that the figure reveals considerable variation across countries, with a 59% point gap between Uruguay, with the highest level of trust at 81%, and Colombia, with the lowest at 22%. The report states that a majority of respondents express trust in elections in only 4 out of 20 countries in the round. Guyana is about to craft a road safety action plan. Government says this is part of the adequate housing and urban transport program being funded by the Inter-American Development Bank. The Department of Public Information says the plan was diagnosed and analyze the overall situation, identify key risks, opportunities, and starting points for improvements. The studies will also be used to prepare an action plan of activities and investments to be financed and implemented in order to reduce the number of fatalities over time. The Public Works Ministry says it wants to hire a consultant to draft the Road Safety Action Plan. The consultant is expected to have experience in road traffic safety analysis, particularly relating to engineering, enforcement and investigation, conducting legal services, reviews, and comparative law analysis. The consultant will also be asked to identify legislative and institutional deficiencies and recommend appropriate measures for improvement. The Guyana Police Force is denying that it received political instructions to cut down several palm trees around the Tactical Services Unit's Drill Square. There have been suggestions in some quarters since the trees felled last week that they were ordered removed because they are political symbols of the opposition People's National Congress reform. Instead, the police force says that the several decades-old trees have been cut down because they were rotten and posed a risk to life and property. That law enforcement agency categorically states that at no time was any order given to the police force by any government official or politician for trees to be destroyed. Two men from West Coast Demerara are facing charges of electricity theft. Police say they found a quantity of electrical wires and 2 electricity meters at a house at Lajazzi village. Investigators say that the suspect was questioned about having GPL properties in his possession, but he did not give any reasonable explanation. He was immediately arrested. Police say another man was arrested at Cornelia Ida village after police found GPL wires and a meter on his premises. Both suspects were placed into custody for the offense of illegal diversion of electricity. Investigations continue. 3 persons have been arrested in connection with the alleged attempt to bribe a policeman with $700,000 after one of them was arrested on 2 sentence warrants. The alleged bribery occurred at the Golden Grove Police Station, East Bank, Demerara. Police say that after the 37-year-old man was apprehended on 2 sentence warrants and taken to the police station, he called his lawyer by telephone. The detained man was, according to police, visited by a 25-year-old woman who gave him a package. The police force is alleging that the man then asked to speak with the investigating officer and give him $700,000 in the presence of another policeman to scrap the investigation and prosecution against him. According to the law enforcement agency, the detainee was told of the offense and cautioned, and the monies have been marked pending charges. The 38-year-old man and the woman were later contacted and told of the offense of conspiracy to engage in a corrupt transaction with an agent. Now for the news in the region. Trinidad and Tobago has acquired 2 new Coast Guard vessels. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley says the vessels will be key to go after gun trafficking and illegal migration. More in this report from TTT News.
Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley encouraged the TNT Coast Guard to use these very effective ships to deter illegal immigrants from entering. He said these new additions can endure patrols of up to 28 days at sea and will secure the borders of both Trinidad and Tobago.
They now bring to us the possibilities and I dare say the likelihood that they will stand between us and all comers, the large and small craft, with good intent and otherwise, protecting our fisheries and protecting our borders in its totality.
National Security Minister Fitzgerald Hines said border protection has been on government's priority list for some time, and these vessels will ensure every part of the border is secure. He noted, though, that government is working on procuring other types of vessels in the future.
But as we speak, we are working on the acquisition of other types of vessels because we have different layers of the security network blanket is tiered.
And Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi noted that the vessels are long overdue and gives this country an added layer of protection.
The OPV vessels were bought for that purpose. They were unfortunately not picked up, and we have had significant need for vessel protection on our borders for years.
Dr. Rowley, though, assured that Tobago is no longer left out.
The people of Tobago, particularly Eastern Tobago, who have been feeling naked and exposed because our flag has not been flying as it should. Our vessels have not been cruising as they should. Our patrols have not been staying out at night as they should. We now have equipment that can address those issues.
Although the vessels arrived in July, the vessels were only launched on Sunday, since training for the crew and maritime rules and regulations had to be conducted prior to its commissioning. Sonolala, TTT News.
Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown is again calling on his arch-rival, Asot Michael, to step aside and run as an independent candidate. Mr. Michael, who remains a government parliamentarian, had resigned about 3 years ago after he had been held by British investigators on suspicion on financial crimes. He was subsequently released. Since then, he and Prime Minister Brown have been at loggerheads over efforts to remove him as a candidate for his constituency. In an Antigua newsroom video, the Prime Minister has publicly said that Mr. Michael would not be allowed to run on the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party ticket, and instead he could do so as an independent.
We have to protect the integrity of our political institutions. We have to protect the integrity of our country and the legacy of our country as well. You think I want British officials to sanction this country because we refuse to cooperate in bringing someone to justice, assuming that he is guilty? And these things have happened in other countries in which countries refuse to act, and next thing they get all kind of sanctions. I'm not going to subject my country to any sanctions because of our negligence or refusal to cooperate with international. And Asset Michael ought to understand that and to just stand down and stop creating confusion. If he wants to run as independent candidate.
The new leader of the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party, SKNLP, is a former chairman, Dr. Terence Drew. He takes over from a long-standing party leader, former Prime Minister Dr. Denzel Douglas. Dr. Drew was named winner in a post on the party's official Facebook page following the party's national conference held at the St. Kitts Marriott yesterday. Drew won 184 votes out of a total of 412 votes cast. Speaking before the ballots were cast, he said one of his plans is to increase its support base and welcome back those who left except incumbent Prime Minister Timothy Harris.
I want to welcome all of our comrades who would have left our party for one reason or the other to come back to our party, saving one. I, Dr. Terence Drew, will not sit or negotiate anything with Dr. Timothy Harris. I welcome home everyone else, and he's the only person I will not sit with as a matter of principle.
The new leader of the St. Kitts and Nevis Labour Party is also targeting youth, women and foreigners, many of them nationals of the Dominican Republic.
To our migrant communities, I want to say to them that this party has always been a party of inclusiveness. Y para la gente que habla español, que me dice siempre que nosotros no hablan de ustedes, yo quiero decir que este partido es tu partido también. Y tú vas a tener un líder que pueda hablar directamente con ustedes. I include that Spanish part to let the migrant community know, because many of them reached out to me and said they don't feel sometimes that they are included, and I want them to know that they will be included. They understood what I just said.
This is the first time that the 90-year-old St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party has had an open contest for the position of leader. And across in the Bahamas, the opposition Free National Movement FNM at the weekend also elected a new leader. He is Michael Pintard. The FNM lost the recent general elections, and since then, the party leader, Hubert Minnis, had found it hard to hold on to the FNM leadership. Newly minted leader Mr. Pintard, shortly after he was announced as the winner, told the party faithful that he was sorry for the mistakes made.
Lest we make the mistake of not listening carefully to the population, we also had some missteps. We made some mistakes. We had some unforced errors. The truth is, sometimes we didn't listen to you the way we ought to. Sometimes we forgot that we are your servants.
That's right.
We work for you.
That's right.
That we have temporary jobs.
That's right.
And so we needed to exercise collectively, no one person, no two person, collectively we needed to demonstrate humility that comes from a servant heart.
Yes.
Some of the decisions we made, while they may have come from a good place, had some unintended consequences of negatively affecting many of you.
He also attributes the FNM's defeat at the recent general elections to harsh COVID measures. The leader of the Bahamas' opposition Free National Movement also promises to work with the government in areas that will benefit residents of the Family Islands. And lastly, in the region, Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown is not satisfied with the judgment that freed 3 former government ministers. High Court Judge Colin Williams last week freed Dr. Jacqui Quinn, Harold Lovell, and Wilmoth Daniel of embezzlement, conversion, and corruption regarding the acquisition of 3 Daewoo buses. The court ruled that the trio had no case to answer. The defendants were accused of using the buses donated to the former administration by South Korea and worth almost $75,000 each for their own personal use. After 8 full days of submitting evidence and hearing arguments from both the defense and the prosecution, the judge accepted a no-case application which cited that collectively there was simply not enough evidence to convict the 3 on those charges. However, Antigua Observer reports that Prime Minister Brown said if he had a say in the matter, he would have challenged the former United Progressive Party ministers on the grounds of misdemeanor in public office, a far lesser charge, but one he believes would have been more likely to stick. Admitting that the charges were flawed to some extent, Mr. Brown notes that the Director of Public Prosecutions will have to decide whether to appeal the High Court decision. Last week, the 3 defendants expressed vindication at the court ruling. Dr. Quinn says she will sue the government for damages. And now for the latest bulletin of international news, we go to the BBC World Service.
BBC News, I'm John Shea. The head of the World Health Organization says the new Omicron variant of the coronavirus has highlighted the need for global solidarity in the face of the continuing pandemic. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus described the variant as potentially very dangerous, especially with half of the world's population still unvaccinated. He called for a global push to get jabs to poorer countries and warned wealthier nations not to be blinded by the success of their vaccination programs.
We shouldn't need another wake-up call. We should all be wide awake to the threat of this virus. But Omicron's very emergence is another reminder that although many of us might think we're done with COVID-19, it's not done with us.
Sweden's parliament has, for the second time in a week, elected Magdalena Andersson as Prime Minister. She briefly became Sweden's first female Prime Minister last Wednesday, but she resigned just 7 hours into the job. From Stockholm, Maddie Savage reports.
After a week of drama for Sweden, Magdalena Andersson will be taking on the top job in politics. It's a cause for celebration for her party, the Social Democrats, who will govern alone for the first time in 15 years. Ms Andersson quit last week after her budget bill failed and Parliament chose a right-wing alternative put forward by 3 opposition parties. She still has to implement that and try and govern without the formal support of the Greens, who quit as a long-term coalition partner because they disagreed with that rival budget.
The trial is getting underway in New York of the British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell, who's charged with trafficking underage girls to be abused by her friend, the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Prosecutors say she recruited and groomed 4 underage girls for Epstein to abuse over a decade, starting in 1994. Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty. She says she's been made a scapegoat for Epstein's crimes. Talks on how to revive the Iran nuclear deal have resumed in Vienna after 5 months. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman has said that Tehran is determined to reach an agreement, but he also said they would not hold bilateral talks with the US team. BBC Persian's Kasra Naji is in Vienna.
There's quite a lot of skepticism that these talks are going to get anywhere soon. The Iranian side is saying that they are happy to get to the end of these talks as soon as possible. They want the sanctions lifted as soon as possible. And the other side, the world powers and the Americans also, they seeing that time is running out in a sense that Iran is making so much advances in its nuclear program. It has to be stopped soon.
This is the latest world news from the BBC. The United Nations has warned that the target of eradicating HIV/AIDS as a public health threat by the end of the decade is unlikely to be met. UNAIDS, the agency leading the fight against the pandemic, says deaths and infection rates aren't slowing down fast enough. A report said the priority should be to ensure proper funding in 5 areas, including access to preventative equipment such as condoms and better support for community health services. The government of Botswana has lost an appeal to overturn a court ruling decriminalising homosexuality. The judges ruled unanimously that the criminalisation of same-sex relationships violated the constitutional rights of the LGBT community. A transgender person has been elected as a mayor for the first time in Bangladesh. Nazrul Islam Ritu, an independent candidate, beat the ruling party-backed rival by a huge margin in the town of Janaidah. Ritu said her victory showed growing acceptance of transgender people. Bangladesh is home to an estimated 1.5 million transgender people who face discrimination and violence. The Indigenous Australian actor and dancer David Gulpalil has died at the age of 68. Decades of work in cinema made him arguably the most familiar face of Aboriginal Australia. Ben Lowings reports.
The tragic Indigenous warrior in the 1971 masterpiece Walkabout, the skillful ranger in Rabbit-Proof Fence, and the elderly wanderer in Charlie's Country, David Gulpalil portrayed a range of Aboriginal characters becoming familiar to millions of moviegoers. A look from his eyes, from a face often striped with white paint, a graceful one-legged pose, all were striking expressions of life representing one of the world's oldest cultures, often all the more powerful and moving when performed in silence.
BBC News.
And that was your international news. Here now is a recap of the highlights. The People's National Congress executive member Aubrey Norton has accused Government Minister Charles Rumson of attempting to mislead black Guyanese about who are good role models. Almost 90% of Guyanese do not believe that votes at general and regional elections are counted accurately. In the region, Trinidad and Tobago gets new Coast Guard vessels to go after crimes at sea. And Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown has told Assot Michael to stop being an obstructionist and run as an independent. And that was your major newscast. I'm Jessica Daw.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.